April 28, 1943. The North Atlantic Star Patrol area, south of Iceland and west of the storm-racked gap where convoys still vanish. Dawn comes as a dim smear of light behind slate clouds, and U-650 rides low on the surface like a wet blade, her bridge watch hunched in oilskins while spray snaps against the rail. Oberleutnant Zursee Ernst von Witzendorf stares through binoculars until his eyes ache, because in this war, you don't see a convoy so much as you sense it first. The faint soot taste in the wind, the distant smudge of smoke against a grey horizon, the uneven rhythm of multiple screws carried through water like a rumour. Then it appears. Merchant ships, dozens, arranged in columns, labouring westbound from Liverpool toward Halifax. Convoy ONS-5, slow and heavy. 43 ships whose engines sound tired even from miles away, with Commodore J.K. Brooke in the Norwegian freighter Rainer trying to keep station as the sea fights every rudder order. Von Witzendorf's first instinct is the old one: shadow, report, summon the pack, because that is how the Atlantic is supposed to be killed. One U-boat finds, many strike. He sends the contact report up the mast in tight bursts, and down in the control room the radioman's fingers move like a pianist's, feeding enigma-coded signals into the ether toward BDU, Admiral Karl Dönitz's command, where staff officers will lay a ruler across a chart and start sliding wolf packs into position. Above him, the Atlantic is already in motion, not just waves, but a larger machine. Mid-ocean, Escort Force Group B7 is with the convoy, and Captain Peter Gretton is out there too. 2 destroyers, a frigate, corvettes, ships whose entire purpose is to make a submarine feel hunted, even when it thinks it's the hunter. On the convoy's edge, Gretton's escorts work under filthy weather and worse visibility, their radar screens smeared with sea return, their ASTIC operators listening through layers of storm noise for the crisp, artificial note of a hull moving wrong. These escorts have new habits now, learned the hard way. When a U-boat radios, you don't just curse it, you run down the bearing because shipborne HF/DF can point you toward a transmitter fast enough to force it under. The moment U-650 reports, the moment the Germans begin to coordinate, the Americans and British are already answering, not by reading the content, but by hearing the direction of the call, turning radio waves into a compass needle. Von Witzendorf feels the pressure almost immediately. An aircraft appears at intervals, forcing him to crash dive and come up again, each dive breaking line of sight and turning his careful geometry into guesswork. The sea itself is against him, wind rising, convoy speed fluctuating, columns shearing out of alignment, so he fights to hold contact, because contact is everything. Without it, the wolf pack becomes blind, and a blind pack starves. By nightfall, other U-boats are moving toward his reports. U-375, U-386, U-528, U-537, closing like wolves across a snowy field. Each commander hungry for the one clean torpedo run that will make his patrol worth it. But out on the convoy's flank, the escorts are doing something new enough to feel like cheating. They are not merely guarding the merchants, they are attacking the idea of coordination itself, charging at radar contacts that vanish, dropping depth charges on doubtful ASTIC echoes, forcing submarines to dive at the precise moment they most need to stay up and see. In the darkness, U-650's bridge watch catches the convoy's silhouette again, blacker shapes against a black sea, and von Witzendorf prepares to guide the first wave, imagining the columns as a predictable road. Then, subtly at first, the road shifts. The convoy's angle changes, just a few degrees, like a man turning his shoulder to slip past someone in a doorway. And to a U-boat crew used to the old Atlantic, it feels like the convoy has turned away, not randomly, but intentionally, as if the merchantmen have been warned in advance where the wolves are waiting. He watches the bearing creep, watches the range not close the way it should, watches the smoke smear drift off his expected line, and a cold thought forms that nobody says out loud. They're not where they're supposed to be. In BDU's world, the convoy is supposed to follow a plotted route, and the pack is supposed to form a trap across it. Yet here, under storm and escort pressure and invisible intelligence, the convoy seems to slide away from the knife. The radio man wants to transmit again. More reports, more corrections. But every transmission is a flare, and von Witzendorf knows the escort's HF/DF sets are hungry. He can feel the enemy's attention like heat on the back of his neck. He orders silence, then breaks silence, then orders silence again, torn between the need to hold the pack together and the need to survive long enough to attack. On the convoy's bridge wings, the merchant captains see only darkness and spray, but they can feel the escorts maneuvering hard, feel columns being ordered to keep station, feel course changes passed down the line in lamp flashes and signal flags whenever the wind allows, small turns that, to the men below the surface, look like a convoy refusing to walk into a waiting fist. Somewhere in the escort screen, a radar operator calls out a contact. Somewhere else, an Aztec man sings out lost contact, and the depth charges go anyway. And in U-650's control room, the air grows damp and sour as von Witzendorf realizes his greatest weapon, coordination, may be turning into his greatest weakness. Because the more the pack radios, the more the escorts can disrupt the pack, and the more the convoy can keep slipping sideways out of the trap. He wanted a clean approach. Shadow in daylight, strike at night, vanish before dawn. Instead, the Atlantic is becoming a chessboard, where the convoy itself seems to move like it knows the wolf's next square. And as U-650 struggles to keep contact through storm, aircraft, and charging escorts, the crew begins to understand the terrifying possibility that will define the months ahead. The convoys are no longer simply sailing west. They are being routed, protected by tactics and intelligence that make a wolf pack feel like it's hunting a ghost. May 4th, 1943, Mid-Atlantic. Convoy ONS-5 has been in contact for days now, and the ocean has turned into a living thing that won't stop shaking its shoulders. Waves slap across merchantmen in uneven bursts, columns loosen and tighten like tired lungs, and the escorts of B-7, Captain Peter Gretton in his leader destroyer, with ships spread thin around 40-plus merchants, work in a rhythm that is half navigation and half street fight. Radar sweeps, HF/DF bearings, hard turns, depth charge runs made on instincts sharpened by too many funerals. Out on U-650, von Witzendorf feels the whole North Atlantic system turning against him. Every time he radios, the escorts seem to materialize at the edge of darkness as if pulled by an invisible rope. And every time he holds silence, the convoy's course changes just enough to make his plotted intercept go stale, like a door closing a second before your hand reaches the latch. This is the moment German crews will later describe in bitter shorthand, convoys turning away. Because it isn't just seamanship. It feels like foreknowledge, like the merchant columns are being nudged by a mind outside the storm, routed around the densest U-boat concentrations, while the escorts punch holes in the pack's coordination whenever a transmitter flares. In Gretton's world, the sea is chaos, and the convoy is a patient he refuses to let die. He keeps the screen aggressive, forcing submarines down, using radar to run at shapes that might be periscopes, and HFDF to punish any commander who can't resist calling BDU again. As night falls, the wolf packs, Star and Finker, tighten from multiple directions, a loose ring becoming a fist, and on German boats the mood shifts from hunger to urgency. Because storms can hide you, but they also blind you. You can surface, yes, but you might surface into an escort's bow wave, into starshell glare, into a corvette's gunfire that forces a crash dive and ruins your attack geometry. In the convoy, you can hear the violence even if you can't see it, engines laboring as ships fight to keep station, the occasional crack of a gun fired at a shadow, the metal groan of hull plates flexing, and the shouted orders passed down by lamp and signal when the wind allows. Every course change is small, but the cumulative effect is brutal for the attackers. Your predicted meeting point is always sliding sideways, always escaping your line. Then May 5th arrives like a hammer in the dark, the one night where the pack does claw into the convoy, and the Atlantic becomes a close-range nightmare. Multiple torpedo spreads, sudden explosions that nobody witnesses clearly, because rain and darkness swallow the flashes. Merchantmen dropping out of column, distress rockets swallowed by cloud, rescue ships fighting the sea to reach men who are already freezing. U-boats like U-264 and U-628 fire in the early hours, and within minutes, the convoy's order fractures further. Ships hit and falling behind, escorts forced to choose between chasing contacts and protecting the columns still intact. Gretton's screen stretched to the tearing point. On a bridge wing, an escort officer watches a merchantman's stern lift and vanish, and knows the awful arithmetic. Every escort that breaks away to hunt a submarine leaves a seam for another submarine to knife through. Yet every escort that stays close and passive invites the pack to keep firing until the convoy bleeds out. Gretton chooses aggression anyway, and this is where the Germans begin to feel something they didn't feel in 1941 or even early 1942, being hunted while hunting. Radar contacts illuminated by star shells, escorts charging down bearings, depth charges dropped not only on confirmed submarine tracks, but on likely ones, forcing U-boats to dive right when they most need to stay up and see. In a U-boat control room, the boat's angle changes. Men bracing as depth charge concussions ripple through the hull like giant fists, dials trembling, light bulbs flickering, and above, the convoy's columns, scattered by storm, keep turning, keep adjusting, slipping away from the neat trap lines BDU drew on charts, because the escorts are buying the convoy time, and time in this war is oxygen. By dawn, the sea is littered with absence, gaps where ships should be, and the Germans feel the same shock in reverse. They have struck, yes, but they have also been forced to break off attacks, to dive, to retreat, to repair damage, because the escort groups have learned how to make every torpedo run expensive. And as the weather begins to lift in the following hours, the convoy approaches the invisible line that matters most, the reach of land-based air cover, where aircraft can finally stay overhead long enough to make a surfaced U-boat's life a countdown, and the pack's advantage collapses fast. For the German crews, that's the moment the phrase "turned away" becomes something darker than tactics. It becomes omen. The sense that the entire Atlantic system is now designed to deny them the decisive night, to reroute convoys, reinforce escorts, and inflict losses on the attackers themselves. And the losses begin to stack in a way that will soon earn, May 1943, its name inside the Kriegsmarine. Black May. In BDU offices, the numbers will become unbearable. U-boats sunk and damaged at a rate the force can't sustain. And by May 24th, Dönitz will order the campaign curtailed, a temporary halt born from the realization that wolf packs can no longer reliably overpower escorted convoys in the North Atlantic. But out here, inside the storm and oil smoke and exhaustion of ONS-5, that strategic collapse isn't a memo yet. It's a feeling that creeps into the bones of every submariner listening to propellers fade the wrong way. The convoy is no longer walking into your trap. It is sliding away from it, and every time it slides, the ocean feels a little less like Germany's hunting ground and a little more like the Allies' managed battlefield. May 5th, 1943. Night falls over the North Atlantic like wet wool, and convoy ONS-5, outbound slow, battered, and already bleeding, pushes into a strange, treacherous boundary where warm Gulf Stream air meets the cold Labrador current. The sea suddenly exhales a blanket of fog so thick it feels like the world has been erased, visibility collapsing until even a ship's next column is only a darker smudge inside grey nothing. On the bridge of HMS Vedette, one of Captain Peter Gretton's B-7 escorts, the wind carries the smell of wet paint and cordite, and the watch officer keeps wiping moisture from his binoculars, even though there is nothing to see. Yet below, in the dim glow of the radar room, there is an eye that does not care about fog. British centimetric radar, sharp and unforgiving, painting small hard returns on the screen where German U-boats have surfaced to attack, believing the fog has finally given them back the night. Out on the Atlantic's skin, U-boat crews do what they have always done in bad weather. Come up, breathe diesel air, run fast on the surface, and slide into position to fire. Wolfpack doctrine depends on surface mobility and the ability to see silhouettes and bow waves at close range. But tonight, something feels wrong from the first minutes. Men on conning towers strain into milk-white darkness and see nothing, while somewhere an escort is already turning toward them with impossible certainty, as if the fog is transparent. In U-boat control rooms, the mood shifts from predatory to confused. "How are they finding us?" a petty officer mutters, not loud, but loud enough, because fear makes you talk. In the convoy, merchant captains feel the escort screen tightening like a fist. Signal lamps blink brief orders, minor course corrections, speed adjustments, because the convoy is still turning away in those small degrees that ruin a plotted intercept. And now the escorts are turning the fog itself into a weapon. If the Germans cannot see, they cannot coordinate, and if they cannot coordinate, the pack becomes a scattering of solitary hunters. At 23:09, Vedette catches a radar contact in the fog, then another, two separate shapes where there should be only sea. The destroyer's engines throb as she charges, bow lifting and slamming, and when the first dark shadow begins to submerge ahead, the escort does not hesitate, dropping a heavy pattern of depth charges that detonate with dull orange flashes under the surface, the shockwave thumping through steel plates like a giant's hand on a drum. The men aboard Vedette don't see a submarine die, they feel it, in the way the water seems to kick after the explosions, in the sudden oil smell that rises even through fog, and in the uncanny emptiness that follows when the radar return vanishes and does not come back. Historians will later suggest this first fog night attack likely destroyed U-531. But on the bridge that night, it is simply one less shadow in a sea full of them. Minutes later, Loosestrife, another B-7 corvette, also gets a radar contact close enough to taste. The U-boat turns away and fires stern torpedoes while diving, a desperate move born from being suddenly hunted, and the escort's crew hears the whisper of passing weapons in imagination as much as in water, because in fog you fear what you cannot confirm. Across this night, it becomes a running brawl in zero visibility. Escorts charging radar blips, U-boats crash diving, depth charges and gunfire puncturing the fog in brief violent stabs, while the convoy itself staggers onward, columns fraying and reforming, ships slipping out of line after near misses or collisions that nobody intended but fog makes inevitable. In a German boat, a young helmsman grips the wheel with sweat-cold hands, while the captain barks depth orders. Down to 80 meters, 100, and every creak of the hull sounds like a confession. The diesel stink is gone, replaced by the sour, metallic air of submerged life, and the men listen for the telltale pings of astic, for the rising thunder of propellers overhead, for the first crack of depth charges that turns the boat into a shaking tin can. Above, the escorts are doing exactly what teardrop hunters will do 2 years later in a different war phase, forcing the submarine down, slowing it, stripping it of initiative. Only now the tool is fog plus centimetric radar plus relentless aggression, and the effect is immediate. U-boats that thought they finally owned the night are being pushed into the deep, blind and frustrated, right when coordination is supposed to deliver the kill. By dawn, the fog thins in ragged patches, and the battle's arithmetic becomes visible in absence. ONS-5 has lost ships. 13 merchantmen will be gone by the end of the week-long struggle, but the Wolfpacks have paid a price that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. In the battle window from late April to May 6th, the Germans commit the weight of packs like Star and Finke, and 7 U-boats are sunk and others damaged, bleeding away trained crews faster than replacements can learn the Atlantic. On BDU charts, the pack commanders can still draw lines and arrows, but the C has changed. HF/DF means every radio call risks being run down. Escorts can force contact loss by simply charging the bearing, and the convoy's route no longer behaves like a predictable highway. It behaves like a moving target, managed by an enemy that seems to anticipate the densest danger zones. For German crews, the emotional shock is not just that escorts are tougher, it is that the entire system that once made wolf packs lethal, reports, concentration, massed night attacks, now feels like a trap that exposes them. In the cramped control room of U-650, von Witzendorf listens to the radio traffic fragment, to other boats reporting failed attacks, damage, forced dives, lost contact. He hears the unspoken truth in the pauses. The convoy is slipping away again, not because it is faster, but because it is being given the gift of time by escorts that can see through fog and punish the pack for trying to coordinate. And far away, though nobody aboard these steel tubes can see it, May 1943 is stacking into a month the Germans will name with bitterness. Black May, when U-boat strength peaks yet losses become catastrophic, and Admiral Karl Dönitz will order a temporary halt to the campaign on May 24th, pulling boats back because the Atlantic has stopped being a hunting ground and has become a grinder. Out here, on the morning after the Fog Night fight, there is no memo yet. Only the lived sensation of being outplayed. A convoy that refuses the knife, escorts that charge like they know where you are, and an ocean that suddenly feels like it belongs to the side with radar screens, HF/DF bearings, and enough steel to keep pressing until the Wolfpack breaks. May 6th, 1943. North Atlantic. Morning light finally breaks through the ragged fog, and the sea looks almost calm in places, which makes the wreckage feel even more obscene. Gaps in columns where merchant hulls should be, rafts and oil slicks, the faint smell of fuel and wet cargo, and the knowledge that some men went into the water in the dark and simply never came back. Convoy ONS-5 is still moving, slow, battered, westbound, but it is moving. And that fact alone is a kind of victory because for a week, the Wolfpack Star and Finca have tried to turn it into a graveyard. On the bridge of HMS Vedette, Captain Peter Gretton's officers look like they've aged a year. Eyes raw from salt and sleepless watches, hands cracked from cold metal, voices worn thin by repeating the same orders. Contact, plot, charge, drop. Yet there is a hard energy under the exhaustion, because this morning they can feel the enemy's rhythm changing. The U-boats are still near, still dangerous, but they are no longer moving with the confident mass of a pack that owns the night. They are moving like injured animals that keep getting forced under whenever they try to coordinate. And for the German crews, men who built their entire Atlantic identity around the idea that one sighting plus one radio report could summon a killing swarm, the shock is almost physical. Again and again they surface into fog or darkness, expecting to find predictable silhouettes. And again the convoy's bearing is wrong. The columns have slid, the intercept point has drifted, as if the merchantmen have an instinct for the densest danger and refuse to walk into it. The phrase that spreads between boats is bitterly simple. They turned away. But what it really means is something more terrifying. The trap is no longer theirs to set. In U-650's control room, von Witzendorf fights the problem in the only ways he has: math, patience, and nerve. Yet the Atlantic is stripping him of all three. Every transmission to BDU risks being fixed by Allied HFDF and run down by charging escorts. And every time he holds silence, he loses the convoy's exact track because weather and evasive course changes smear certainty into guesswork. The U-boat crew can feel it as a new kind of helplessness, not the helplessness of being depth-charged, at least that is loud and honest, but the helplessness of watching the convoy slide out of the geometry you prepared, like a man stepping sideways just as you swing. They are stunned not by a single tactic, but by the coordination of many: aggressive escorts, radar that sees through fog, direction finding that punishes radio discipline failures, and the sheer willingness of the escort commander to attack rather than merely guard. Mid-morning, the sea fight is still not over, and the convoy's escorts are reinforced as the battle reaches its climax. Support ships join in the outer screen, and the pressure on the pack becomes relentless in a way that feels new in 1943. The U-boats are being pushed into a defensive posture while trying to conduct an offensive one, forced down and slowed, losing the surface mobility that makes wolf packs lethal. On the merchant bridges, no one talks about strategy. They talk about keeping station and not colliding in the fog, about following the Commodore's signals, about prayers muttered into collars, about the horrible discipline of not stopping for survivors when you know a torpedo could already be on the way. Yet they feel the meaning of the escort's aggression in a very simple, human way. The destroyers and corvettes keep leaving the protective ring to charge something out in the grey, and then coming back again, and every time they do it, the convoy gets another hour of life. Far away, in BDU's map rooms, Admiral Karl Dönitz's staff are watching the same battle through the cold language of signals, contacts, claims, losses. And for years, this kind of traffic has ended with the same logic. Convoys lose ships, U-boats return with tonnage, the campaign continues. But now the numbers are changing in a way that makes the room feel smaller. ONS 5 is losing merchantmen, 13 by the end. But the U-boat arm is losing boats and crews at a rate that cannot be shrugged off as acceptable attrition. And that is the beginning of the month the Germans will soon call Black May. This is not just one convoy battle. It is a symptom that the whole Atlantic system has tilted. U-boat strength is near its peak, and yet Allied sinkings are declining, while U-boat losses climb, an inversion so severe that by May 24th, Dönitz will issue the order that sounds, to his own men, like heresy: a temporary halt to the North Atlantic offensive, a withdrawal to regroup because the campaign has become unsustainable. But out at sea on May 6th, none of that is a formal decision yet. It's a feeling that spreads through the boats in the tightest moments. The feeling that each time they surface, someone is already coming, and each time they call for help, the call itself becomes a locator. In the control rooms, men begin to whisper about new radar, about direction finding, about the escorts being too fast to evade, and the fear underneath the technical language is simple: the ocean is no longer neutral. The convoy keeps heading west, and when the weather lifts further, the approach of air cover becomes another invisible wall. The wolf packs can still fire, still kill, but the window to do it cleanly is shrinking, and the escort's ability to buy time with aggression means the convoy can reach the safer zones before the pack can finish the job. On a battered U-boat, a tired petty officer listens to the captain mutter calculations under his breath: range, bearing, speed, and watches the pencil marks on the chart drift again as the convoy turns another few degrees. And for the first time he hears something close to disbelief in a voice trained to sound certain. They're avoiding us. It isn't magic. It's the accumulated weight of Allied tactics and intelligence and technology, pressing down on the old Wolfpack method until it starts to collapse under its own need for coordination. And when the final night fades and ONS 5 is still afloat, hurt, missing ships, but alive, the German crew's shock has a new edge. They didn't just fail to destroy a convoy. They learned the convoy can slip away, the escorts can hunt back, and the Atlantic can punish the hunters so hard that the campaign itself might have to stop. May 23rd, 1943. Carnival, the U-boat command bunker outside Lorient. Thick concrete walls sweating in the damp Breton air, telephone bells cutting through cigarette smoke, map lamps casting harsh cones of light onto the Atlantic like stage spotlights. And Admiral Karl Dönitz stands over a plotting table as if he can force the sea to behave by staring harder. The pins and grease pencil lines tell a story that feels like betrayal, because ONS-5 was supposed to be the kind of convoy battle that proved the Wolfpack still owned the ocean. Yet the week-long struggle from 29th April to 6th May has instead left an ugly ledger. 13 merchant ships sunk from a convoy of 42. Yes, but also 6 U-boats lost in the battle, with additional losses around the operation, and 7 more damaged badly enough to abort, a rate that turns experienced crews into numbers faster than training can replace them. In the reports, the same phrases recur like bruises: escorts charging contacts, radar finding boats in fog, convoys making evasive turns, and, most poisonous of all, complaints that the enemy seems to anticipate where the packs are forming. Dönitz's staff read out details with the careful tone men use when they know a commander is deciding whether a whole strategy has failed, and in the background you can almost hear the Atlantic itself, the clack of snorkel head valves, the tremble of depth charges, the tight breathing of men at 80 meters waiting for the next pattern. Out at sea, on boats scattered across the convoy routes, German commanders feel the change in their gut before they can prove it on paper. A convoy is sighted, a report is transmitted, and then, too often, escorts appear on the bearing like they've been summoned, sweeping toward the direction finding line, while the convoy itself makes a small, stubborn course change that ruins the intercept you just calculated. U-Boat.net's battle narrative will later spell it out bluntly. ONS-5's contact reports were detected by escort HF/DF. The convoy took evasive action, and the escort swept toward those HF/DF bearings. Exactly the kind of countermove that makes a wolfpack feel like it's hunting while someone is hunting the pack. In a control room, you can picture it. The radio man's hand hovering over the key because the captain wants help but knows the call itself is a flare. The navigator's pencil scratching a new line as the convoy's estimated track keeps sliding. The captain's voice tightening as he says again, "No more transmissions." And then, minutes later, breaking that rule because without coordination, there is no pack, only lonely boats. And the escorts are no longer merely defensive rings around merchants. ONS-5's escort group B7, under Commander Peter Gretton, had destroyers and corvettes built and trained to fight back. And in the fog nights, they used radar and aggressive sweeps to force submarines under right when surface mobility is life. In the bunker at Carnival, the intelligence war sits behind every decision like a second map layered over the first. Both sides are breaking into each other's information, and U-Boat.net notes the grim irony that Allied ultra decrypts could often enable rerouting convoys around packs, much to the frustration of the Germans, even while German B-service sometimes provided information about convoy routing. Dönitz knows this is not superstition, but a real, grinding contest of minutes and messages, and the moment one side gets faster, the ocean itself changes hands. He also knows ONS-5 is not an isolated bruise. May is turning black in real time. The statistics coming in are the kind that make an admiral age. U-boat strength is near its peak, yet Allied shipping losses are declining, while U-boat losses spike. The label Black May will stick because it captures the sensation of a force reaching maximum effort and suddenly being punished for it. Dönitz paces once, just once, then stops, because pacing is what you do when you still believe there is a clever maneuver left. He looks down at the convoy route pins and the wolfpack lines, and you can feel the moment his war instinct collides with arithmetic. If he keeps feeding boats into these routes, he will bleed away the trained core of his arm in a month. Outside the bunker, U-boat crews are still trying to live the doctrine. Surface at night, race to contact, fire into the columns. But now even finding the convoy is contested. Air cover reaches farther, escorts are reinforced by support groups, and every time a U-boat breaks radio discipline to gather the pack, it risks being run down by HF/DF, a capability the Allies had expanded aggressively by 1943. The same battle report that makes Dönitz's jaw clench also highlights how the convoy was routed north to extend Iceland-based air escort, and how a temporary ultra-blackout around 25th April meant ONS-5 wasn't rerouted in time to avoid the star line, proof that when Allied decrypt speed falters, the pack can still bite, yet even then the escort's improved tools and aggression made the bite costly. That is the cruel pivot. The Germans did get into ONS-5, did sink ships, but the outcome still felt like defeat because it proved the escorts could both protect and punish, turning convoy battles from one-sided slaughter into mutual attrition the U-boat arm cannot afford. In the bunker, the decision is finally spoken in the tone of an order that knows it will wound morale. Halt the North Atlantic convoy campaign, pull the boats back to regroup, re-evaluate tactics, stop throwing crews into a grinder that is no longer yielding the tonnage demanded. Multiple summaries of Black May capture the essence of it. On 24th May 1943, Dönitz ordered a temporary halt withdrawal after being shocked by losses. Somewhere out in the Atlantic, a U-boat captain receives the signal and reads it twice because it feels impossible. Wolf packs don't pause, they hunt or they die. And in his cramped control room, the men don't cheer. They stare because the order confirms what they've been sensing each time a convoy seemed to turn away from their plotted trap. The enemy has learned how to manage the battlefield, how to reroute, reinforce, and retaliate. And the radio calls that once summoned wolves now also summon hunters. The boat turns slowly toward home waters, and the Atlantic that once felt like Germany's night highway now feels like a monitored corridor. Fog no longer a friend, radio no longer a safe tool, and convoys no longer passive targets, but moving fortresses that can slip sideways out of the knife. May 24th, 1943. Mid-Atlantic, somewhere in the grey waste between Newfoundland and Ireland, where the sea has no landmarks and the sky sits low like a lid, U-650 is running surfaced in a hard wind, her diesels hammering, spray-knifing over the bridge, and Oberleutnant zur See Ernst von Witzendorf is staring at his chart as if the pencil lines might still obey him when the radio man climbs up from below and hands him a decoded signal from BDU. The paper is damp at the edges, the letters sharp and merciless, and for a second he can't make himself read it because he already knows what it must be, an order that wolf packs do not receive in the language of triumph. The convoy lanes are still out there, the merchants are still moving, the escorts are still hunting, and yet the order says the North Atlantic offensive is to be halted temporarily, boats withdrawn, the campaign pulled back because the losses have become intolerable. On a boat built on aggression, the words land like a physical blow, and you feel it ripple through the men in small involuntary ways. A petty officer swallowing too hard, the helmsman's grip tightening on the wheel, the radio man's eyes flicking up as if he expects to be blamed for the message itself. Von Witzendorf reads the signal again, slower, tasting the shame between the lines, because everyone on board understands what this means. For years, the Wolfpack has been the Reich's most feared weapon at sea, a system that promised that one sighting could summon a swarm and drown Britain in tonnage. Now the system has been turned against them, and the fleet is being told, quietly, in code, that the ocean has become too dangerous to keep feeding. In the control room, the captain's voice is calm because it has to be. He gives the course change like any other maneuver. Steer for the Bay of Biscay, maintain radio silence unless ordered. But the crew hears what is unsaid. They are turning away, the way convoys have been turning away from their packs, sliding sideways out of the knife. Except now it is the U-boat that is being forced to retreat from a battlefield it no longer controls. The timing makes the order feel even crueler, because the men have been living the proof for weeks. Convoy ONS-5 fought from late April into early May, and even when the pack sank 13 ships, the escorts inflicted losses that were supposed to be impossible. 6 U-boats sunk in that single convoy battle and others badly damaged, the turning point that made the U-boat arm start calling the month Black May. And May itself is now a rising cliff of deaths. U-boat strength is at a peak, hundreds operational, over 100 at sea. Yet sinkings of Allied ships are declining while U-boat losses spike, and by month's end around 41 to 42 submarines will be gone, the worst monthly losses the arm has yet suffered. In the cramped steel of U-650, those numbers aren't abstract. They are names men speak softly over coffee. Boats that left Lorient weeks ago and simply never answered again. Commanders who vanished with their crews. Friends who should have been in these bunks and aren't. The psychological shock, the thing that makes crews swear the convoys turned away, as if guided by a mind, tightens into a darker certainty now. The Allies are no longer merely defending shipping. They are managing the entire fight, rerouting convoys when they can, reinforcing escorts with support groups, using HF/DF to run down contact reports, using centimetric radar to see surface boats in fog, and forcing the pack to choose between coordination and survival. Von Witzendorf thinks of the cruel mechanics of it. If he radios, he helps BDU concentrate the pack, but he also lights a beacon for direction-finding escorts. If he stays silent, the pack dissolves into lonely hunters, and the convoy slips away. Either way, the battle is no longer on his terms. The diesels keep pounding, and the boat keeps driving east. But now every minute on the surface feels like borrowed life, because even retreating is dangerous. Air patrols push farther, radar reaches into night and weather, and the Bay of Biscay itself has become a gauntlet where aircraft can ambush a surfaced U-boat, forcing crash dives that batter hulls already tired from depth charges. Men on watch scan the horizon, not for smoke columns anymore, but for the sudden dark dot of a plane, and the captain's earlier confidence, the confidence of being hunter, has been replaced by a new discipline. Minimize exposure, minimize transmissions, get home. When the coastline of France finally rises as a low green-grey smear under broken cloud, there is no elation. There is only a strange emptiness. Because coming back to Lorient is not the end of a patrol, it is the confirmation of an era closing. In the harbour, other boats are arriving with patched conning towers and dented pressure hulls. Crews hollow-eyed, mechanics swarming like ants. The air smells of oil and wet concrete and cigarettes, and rumor moves faster than official orders. Dönitz is pulling us back. Too many boats lost. The escorts have new radar. The English can find us in fog. The convoys know where we are. Von Witzendorf walks the pier past faces he recognizes and faces he doesn't, past empty berths that should be filled, and he realizes the most corrosive effect of convoys turning away is not the missed tonnage, but the way it infects belief. If the enemy seems to anticipate you, you begin to doubt every calculation, every chart line, every promise BDU made about how the sea could be controlled. Somewhere inside the bunker complex, staff officers are already rewriting doctrine in hushed voices. Fewer transmissions, different patrol areas, new countermeasures, trying to find a way to make the pack lethal again without making it visible, trying to claw back initiative from an enemy that has learned to hunt the hunters. Outside, U-650's crew begins the grim routine of post-patrol maintenance. Torpedo rooms aired, batteries checked, diesel filters cleaned, men finally shaving after weeks of salt and sweat. But even simple tasks feel different now, because everyone understands this isn't just repair. It's preparation for a new phase where the Atlantic will not forgive old habits. The captain looks once toward the open water beyond the harbour mouth, and in his expression you can see the reversal that defines Black May. Once the convoys were the predictable targets and the packs were the trap, now the convoys can slip away, the escorts can strike back, and the order to withdraw proves the unthinkable. Germany is no longer dictating the terms of the Atlantic War. June 2nd, 1943. Bay of Biscay. Grey-green water under a pale sky. The coastline of occupied France still beyond the horizon, and U-650 is running surfaced in a long, uneasy sprint because even retreat has become a hunted act. The bridge watch tastes aviation fuel on the wind before they see anything, and then a dark speck grows fast, an Allied patrol aircraft sliding out of cloud like a knife, forcing von Witzendorf to bark, "Crash dive!" as men slam the hatch and the boat angles down, the deck tilting under their boots, diesel roar choking into silence, while the pressure hull fills with the damp, metallic breath of submerged life. Black May didn't end when Dönitz issued the withdrawal order on May 24th. It followed the boats home, and the Biscay Run is where the lesson becomes personal, because aircraft now reach farther and hunt more confidently, and every second on the surface feels like a coin you can't afford to spend twice. The crew clings to handholds as the boat passes through 20 meters, 40, 60, the hull creaking, gauges trembling, and above them the sea thuds with distant detonations, depth charges or bombs, each one a reminder that the enemy doesn't need to see your conning tower anymore to guess your path. They can search patterns, follow reports, exploit the moments when a submarine must surface to charge batteries and breathe diesel air. In the control room, a petty officer whispers the phrase that has been spreading across returning boats like a disease. They turned away. He isn't talking about a single convoy's evasive zig. He's talking about the new feeling that convoys don't stumble into the pack the way they used to, that routes change, timings shift, and that the radio calls meant to gather wolves now carry a hidden price. The men have lived the proof in the ONS 5 battle, 29th April to 6th May, when Wolfpack's Star and Finke swarmed, sank 13 ships, and still lost 7 U-boats with 7 more damaged, a trade that would have been unthinkable in the early Atlantic War. Inside Kerneval's concrete bunker at Lorient, staff officers had looked at the same numbers and watched May's losses climb until the campaign itself had to be paused. On paper, it reads like strategy, but on a boat, it feels like being pushed off your own hunting ground. When U-650 finally settles at depth, batteries humming, men sweating in still air, von Witzendorf forces himself to think like a commander and not a cornered animal. Why did the convoy keep slipping? Why did escorts appear on bearings so quickly? Why did the meeting point keep sliding sideways until the attack geometry collapsed? The answer is not one miracle device, it is a system, and the system begins with a soundless truth that every U-boat captain now carries like shrapnel. The enemy is listening while you speak. High-frequency direction finding, HF/DF, Huff-Duff, is no longer a rumor. It is a weapon that turns your contact report into a compass line, and in a convoy fight, that line is all an aggressive escort commander needs to charge the bearing, force you down, and break the pack's cohesion. That is what makes the convoys seem like they turned away with intention. The moment a boat like U-650 reports, an escort can surge toward the transmitter while the convoy alters course, and suddenly the pack is chasing an intercept that no longer exists. Your report has not merely summoned wolves, it has summoned hunters. In the sweaty darkness, the radio man stares at his key as if it's a loaded pistol. He knows BDU's doctrine demands reports, demands coordination, demands concentration of boats on the target, yet the crew has now seen how every transmission risks being punished, how the escorts aren't just guarding merchants but actively attacking the communications that make wolf packs lethal. Above them, the Atlantic has also grown teeth in the air. Long-range patrol aircraft, carrier support groups, widening air cover that shrinks the safe surface window where a U-boat can run fast and see. Even when the sea is foggy, radar can find surface boats. And when fog becomes the Germans' hope, it becomes their trap. Because the escorts can see in ways a conning tower watch cannot. The psychological shift is as brutal as the tactical one. The sea is no longer a wide, indifferent hunting ground. It is a managed battlefield where the Allies can reroute, reinforce, and respond faster than the pack can assemble. And that speed is what makes convoys feel like they are slipping away from the knife just before it falls. Back in Lorient, mechanics on the Penn's Edge watch battered boats return, count the empty berths, and hear the stories with the same pattern. Contact made, convoy bearing shifts, escorts charge in, boat forced down, attack lost, and each retelling makes the old confidence rot a little more. In the wardroom, A returning officer pours coffee with hands that still shake slightly from Biscay air attacks, and you can hear the bitterness turn technical. Talk of new radar, of direction finding, of escorts that won't stay defensive, of support groups that arrive like reinforcements in the middle of the fight, of a convoy system that now behaves like it has nerves. And in the bunker's lamplit map room, the pins are moved again, not to trap convoys, but to avoid losses, because Black May has taught the one lesson Dönitz cannot ignore. If you keep feeding boats into the North Atlantic under these conditions, you will lose the trained core of the U-boat arm faster than Germany can rebuild it. May alone saw catastrophic monthly losses, often summarized as about 41 U-boats destroyed, shocking enough to force that May 24th pause. For the men of U-650, the retreat is not an end. It is an admission that the old method has been exposed, and exposure in submarine war is death. The boat rises cautiously after the aircraft threat fades, snorkelless and vulnerable, diesels coughing back to life, and von Witzendorf watches the horizon while the radio man waits for the next BDU signal that will tell them where the war is going now, because the ocean they knew is gone. The convoys no longer walk into wolf packs, they slip away from them, and the U-boat captains, once the unseen hunters of the Atlantic night, have been forced to learn what it feels like when the prey has ears, eyes, and enough steel to turn your own call for help into the beginning of your end. June 10th, 1943. Lorient, under the shadow of the concrete U-boat pens where the sea air smells of tar, diesel, and damp stone, von Witzendorf walks through a corridor that vibrates faintly with machinery and distant hammering, and he can tell the base is trying to pretend nothing has changed. Mechanics still shout over engines, torpedoes still roll on dollies, officers still carry clipboards like talismans. But the faces are different now, tighter, older, as if everyone has accepted that the Atlantic has started listening back. In a debrief room that feels too small for the weight of what happened, a BDU staff officer points at a chart with a pencil and asks the same question in 3 different ways. When did you first lose contact? When did the convoy alter? When did the escorts begin to charge your bearings? And each time von Witzendorf answers, he hears the uncomfortable truth in his own words, that the convoy didn't escape because it was faster or braver, but because the pack's lifeline, the radio report, had become a vulnerability. The moment the transmitter spoke, the escorts seemed to arrive, and the convoy's course began to slide away from the plotted trap. The staff officer doesn't argue, he just writes it down, because he has been hearing the same pattern for weeks from boats returning battered from ONS-5 and other fights, and now BDU is doing something it hates doing, adapting under pressure. In Kerneval's bunker, men in headphones and map lights talking clipped phrases about HF/DF bearings and escort aggression, about radar that can see boats in fog, about how support groups appear suddenly and keep pressing until a submarine is forced deep and slow. The discussion isn't philosophical, it's mechanical. How do you hunt when the prey can reroute, the guards can find your voice, and the night is no longer blind? Orders begin to change in ways the crews feel immediately. Fewer transmissions, shorter bursts, stricter discipline. Shadowing is still demanded, but now a captain is told to think like a thief with a lantern behind him. Move, report only when necessary. Assume the enemy can hear the direction of your whisper. In the bunks, sailors trade rumors the way men always do when official language is too clean. They've got new radar. They can track our signals. The convoy commodores must be warned. The English are reading us. And the rumors tangle into a single sensation, being watched, even when no aircraft is visible and no escort is near. Von Witzendorf watches his radio man, a young man with nicotine-stained fingers, try to look indifferent as he services the key and cleans contacts. The radio man has always been proud of his skill, of how fast he can send, but now speed feels like guilt, because every burst of dots and dashes might be another escort charging down the bearing like a hound on a scent. In the torpedo rooms, Sailors polish warheads and check pistols and say the old phrases, "We'll get them next time." Yet even they know the next time will not be the same ocean. The old Wolfpack method depended on the enemy being predictable, and after Black May predictability is what the Allies have stolen. On the quay, as von Witzendorf passes another returning boat with dented casing and fresh weld scars, he hears an engineer mutter about few MB, radar warning receivers and detector sets that can sometimes hear enemy emissions before the enemy finds you, devices with strange, half-mystical names spoken like prayers. But even that hope is poisoned by the knowledge that every countermeasure triggers a countermeasure, and that in this war, the side with more factories and more aircraft can afford a longer race. In the officers' mess, an older commander speaks quietly, as if loud voices might summon the Atlantic itself. We used to make them react to us, now we react to them. No one laughs. They drink coffee that tastes burnt and thin and stare at the wall where a map hangs, dotted with pins that used to represent opportunity and now represent danger zones. Somewhere nearby, a clerk carries a list of boats that have not returned, and the list is long enough to feel like an accusation. Men glance at it and then glance away, because looking too long makes you imagine your own boat as an empty berth. In the planning rooms, BDU begins moving pins, not to create giant pack traps in the old style, but to probe for weaker seams, areas with less air cover, times when escorts might be thinner. Yet the irony is cruel. The more you concentrate, the more you must communicate, and communication is now exactly what the escorts are waiting for. Von Witzendorf is given his next set of instructions with a formality that tries to sound like normal patrol planning, but the subtext is survival. Be cautious. Avoid long surface chases in areas of heavy escort strength. Assume aircraft are closer than you think. And above all, do not give away your position with careless signals. He steps back onto U-650 and feels the familiar steel under his boots, the familiar smell of oil and cramped human life. And for a moment, he wants to believe the boat is still what it used to be, an unseen predator. But then he looks at the radio room hatch and thinks of ONS-5's fog nights, of escorts charging into invisibility as if guided, of the convoy slipping sideways out of the trap, and he understands the deeper shock. The Allies didn't just improve a weapon, they improved a system, routing, escorts, detection, reaction speed, and systems are harder to defeat than any single ship. In the next days, as U-650 prepares to sail again, the crew's rituals feel strained. Men stow personal items, check valves, rehearse crash dive drills, and the very act of rehearsing feels like admitting fear. The captain speaks to them in the steady tone of command, telling them the Atlantic is still winnable, telling them the enemy bleeds too, telling them their job is unchanged, but the men can hear the difference between confidence and insistence. On the night U-650 finally slips from Lorient's harbour mouth, the coastline becomes a dark line behind them, and the open ocean spreads out ahead, and von Witzendorf stands on the bridge with salt on his lips and feels the Atlantic's old temptation, space, darkness, the promise of being unseen. Yet even here, even now, he senses the new reality pressing in. Every convoy is a moving fortress. Every escort screen an aggressive hunter, and every radio report a potential betrayal. Somewhere out there, convoys will still turn away, not because they are lucky, but because the ocean has become a managed battlefield where listening is as lethal as torpedoes, and the Wolfpack, for the first time, must learn how to hunt while guarding its own voice. June 16, 1943. Western approaches Liverpool, while U-650 pushes out into the Atlantic under a moonless sky, her diesels thudding and the harbour lights shrinking behind her like dying embers. Another kind of war is being fought in a room that smells of damp wool, pipe smoke, and ink. A convoy routing office where charts cover the walls, and a long table is crowded with rulers, grease pencils, and men who don't fire torpedoes, but move them, silently, by changing where ships will be tomorrow. A Wren hands a message slip to a Royal Navy officer, and he reads it without expression. HFDF, bearings from an escort group, a string of numbers that don't look like violence until you know what they mean. Somewhere on the ocean, a German transmitter spoke, and the direction of that voice has been measured like a compass line. It doesn't reveal content, it doesn't need to, because even a voice without words has a location, and location is enough to change the whole geometry of a convoy battle. The officer leans over the chart, pencil poised, and you can almost hear the difference between 1941 and 1943 in the scratch of graphite. In 1941, a convoy held its track like a blindfolded man walking a straight line. In 1943, the convoy is treated like a living thing that can be guided, nudged, diverted, small turns that cost time but save ships. He shifts a route a few degrees north, then another few degrees west, aiming to slide the next westbound column away from a reported concentration, not by outrunning wolves, but by stepping sideways before the wolves can gather. When he finishes, the new route looks trivial on paper, an arc instead of a line, but out at sea that arc becomes the difference between a pack crossing your bow at midnight and a pack staring at empty water where you should have been. That is the hidden mechanism behind the phrase German crews spit out in disgust. They turned away. Because from the conning tower, it feels like the convoy senses the trap. From this room, it is simply a decision made hours earlier by someone with a pencil and a stack of bearings. Now imagine the other side of the chessboard. On U650, von Witzendorf is standing on the bridge with salt drying on his lips, watching darkness for smoke smears. And he wants a sighting, because without a sighting, the BDU doctrine is dead. His radio man is ready, the key is ready, the old ritual is ready, contact report, shadow, pack concentration, and yet the ritual feels like stepping into a spotlight. When a faint line of smoke finally appears at dawn and grows into the first silhouettes of merchant hulls, the bridge watch stiffens with the old predatory excitement. The convoy is there, real, black shapes against grey sea, and for a moment the Atlantic feels like it used to. Von Witzendorf's first order is automatic. Shadow at distance, keep them in sight. Then comes the second order, the one that now carries poison. Signal BDU. The radio man drops below, and you can feel the tension ripple through the boat, as if the hull itself understands what will happen next. The message goes out in tight bursts, and back in Liverpool a pencil will move, back in an escort's radio room an HFDF needle will swing, and somewhere in the convoy screen an aggressive commander will decide to run down the bearing like a dog released from a leash. Minutes later, as U650 adjusts course to hold contact, a destroyer on the far horizon changes heading. Just a subtle turn at first, nothing dramatic, yet to a submariner it looks like fate bending. The escort doesn't know the content of the message, only the direction of the transmitter, but that is enough to push it toward von Witzendorf's position. The German captain feels the old contradiction close around him. To kill the convoy he must speak. To live he must stay silent. He tries to solve it with discipline. Short transmissions, longer pauses, a wider shadowing distance. But the convoy itself begins to do the thing that makes crews swear. A small course change, then another, passed along the columns by signal lamps and flags and escort radio, a controlled evasive zig that slides the merchant mass away from the predicted intercept point the pack commanders are drawing on their charts. The sea has not changed, the wind has not changed, the convoy commodore has not become a magician. What has changed is that the convoy is now embedded in a system that reacts faster than a wolf pack can assemble. As daylight strengthens, the convoy edges closer to air cover and the escorts tighten their ring, and the German opportunity window shrinks into the brief hours of darkness. Von Witzendorf wants to keep the pack coming, but every additional report risks another escort charging in, and when a radar-equipped ship begins sweeping his suspected area, he is forced into the one move that always destroys coordination. He dives. Inside the boat, the world turns into damp steel and whispered orders. Down angle, steady, at 60 meters, silent running. And the men listen to propellers passing overhead like thunder that never strikes. They can feel the escort's confidence in the steady rhythm of search patterns, the way the screws fade, then return, as if the hunter is willing to keep pressing until battery life and oxygen make the decision for the hunted. Above, the convoy continues to slide, and by the time von Witzendorf risks a periscope depth peak, the silhouettes are wrong again. Bearing shifted, range increased, smoke smears drifting where his chart says they shouldn't. That is the moment the crew's shock becomes resentment. It feels personal, like the convoy is refusing them, like the ships are turning away out of spite. But the truth is colder. This is a managed battlefield now, where the enemy's route and escort response are shaped by signals intelligence, direction finding, radar, and a willingness to use escorts offensively rather than passively. When night finally returns, the pack that should have been converging is scattered. Some boats have been forced down, some have lost contact, some are still racing on the surface, but toward a meeting point the convoy has already abandoned. A young sailor in the radio room whispers, "We called, and they came." And he doesn't mean BDU, he means the escorts. Von Witzendorf sits over his chart and understands that the Atlantic has taught him a brutal new equation. The more you try to be a pack, the more you must speak. And the more you speak, the more the enemy can steer both its convoys and its hunters. So the convoy turns away not because it is lucky, but because your own voice is helping it escape. June 18th, 1943. Mid-Atlantic, late evening, U-650 rides at periscope depth beneath a ceiling of black water, and the boat feels like a held breath. Electric motors whispering, men moving in socks to reduce noise. The control room lit by a single red-shaded lamp that makes faces look bruised. Above them, the convoy is somewhere out there in the darkness. A mass of steel and cargo and human fear moving west. But it isn't the convoy that dominates the captain's mind tonight. It's the escort's reaction time, the speed at which the sea now answers him back. Von Witzendorf wants the old night, the one where a surfaced U-boat could run fast, outpace the escorts and slide into a firing position with the calm inevitability of doctrine. But the night is no longer his. It belongs to radar sets that can paint a conning tower as a bright tick even in weather, to HF/DF bearings that turn a radio burst into a pursuit line, and to aggressive escort commanders who have learned that hesitation is how convoys die. He risks a brief surface run anyway because batteries are not ideology, they are chemistry, and a boat that stays down too long becomes a coffin without enemy help. The hatch opens, cold air rushes into the tower, and the bridge watch climbs into darkness that smells of salt and diesel and distant smoke, eyes sweeping for silhouettes. For a few minutes it feels possible again, a low smear on the horizon that might be funnel smoke, faint darker shapes that could be columns, the suggestion of a target that still moves like a herd. The radio man below is already poised for another short report, and in that moment von Witzendorf realizes the war has turned his crew into gamblers. Every decision is a stake you place against the enemy's sensors. He authorizes a single burst, minimal length, the tightest code he can manage, and the message leaves the boat like a whisper you immediately regret. There is no visible response at first, only ocean and wind. But he has learned that response now lives in angles and headings, not in fireworks. 10 minutes later, far off to port, a thin line of phosphorescence appears, an escort cutting water hard, and another shape changes course behind it, subtle as a predator shifting weight before a sprint. The Germans haven't been spotted in the old sense, not by eyes on a bridge wing, but by a system that hears direction and sees blips and reacts without emotion. Von Witzendorf orders a turn away, then another, trying to keep shadow contact while avoiding a direct charge, and the convoy, almost mockingly, begins to alter too, a slight change propagated down the columns, the herd stepping sideways away from the densest danger as if it can feel the teeth. To the U-boat crew, it looks like the convoy is deliberately refusing them, turning away from the trap before it exists, and the anger that rises is childish and human. Why won't they just keep going straight? Because straight lines are what wolf packs were built to kill. The escort's speed increases, the phosphorescent wake brightening, and suddenly the bridge watch sees a second reality. The bunker men can't draw on charts. The sea itself gives away motion, and anything fast becomes visible. This is why the escorts win now, not because they're braver, but because they can afford to move loudly and still find you, while a submarine must remain quiet and still needs to breathe. The first star shell blossoms somewhere ahead, not close enough to illuminate the U-boat, but close enough to stain the clouds with pale light, and the bridge watch flinches instinctively. The captain knows what that shell really is, an announcement to the convoy that the screen is fighting, a flare that says, "Keep turning, keep moving, we're between you and the wolves." He orders a crash dive, the hatch slams, and the boat drops into black water as the last breath of surface air is replaced by the damp, metallic taste of submerged life. At 30 meters, the noise changes, propellers above in a steady sweep. Then the hard, rhythmic pinging begins, the sound that turns a man's spine cold because it's a question asked with perfect patience. Are you there? The Aztec pings come closer, and you can feel the escort's search pattern in the timing. Forward, then slightly aft, then forward again, like a hand probing in the dark. Depth charges follow not immediately, but after the escort is satisfied with a solution, and when they detonate, the boat shudders as if struck by an invisible hammer. Light bulbs flicker, a gauge needle jumps, and somewhere a sailor mutters a prayer he wouldn't admit to saying on land. Von Witzendorf holds his nerve through the first pattern, then orders a slow change in depth and course, trying to slide out of the box. But the escort sticks, and the second pattern lands closer. The concussion's more violent, the control room briefly filled with the sour smell of battery gas and shaken sweat. The men glance at the captain's face to read the future, because a submarine battle is won or lost in the expression of the man who must decide whether to run, to fight, or to surface. He chooses to run, because running is now the only way to live long enough to attack later. And that choice is the real turning point the crew feels in their stomachs. The U-boat is no longer dictating tempo, it is responding to it. Above, the convoy continues to slide away into safer geometry, and with every minute the chance of a clean torpedo run shrinks, not because the U-boat lacks courage, but because the escort's aggression is buying the merchant's time, and time is distance, and distance is survival. Hours pass like this, diving, creeping, listening, enduring, until the escort finally breaks off to return to the convoy, leaving behind only fading propeller noise and the humiliating quiet of a hunt you were forced to abandon. When von Witzendorf brings the boat back to periscope depth, the horizon is wrong again. No silhouettes where they should be, no smoke smear where his intercept line predicted, only empty water and a sense of being fooled by an opponent who never showed his face. The radio man looks at him, waiting, but the captain doesn't order another report. He stares at the periscope scope and understands the cruel loop. Reporting invites pursuit. Pursuit forces dives. Dives break contact. Broken contact means the convoy turns away and disappears. In the control room, the petty officer who first whispered the phrase says it again, quieter, not as anger now, but as diagnosis. They turned away. And in that one sentence is the death of an era, because it means the Atlantic has learned to deny the U-boat what it needs most: coordination, surface speed, and darkness. And the night that used to belong to the wolf packs now vanishes the moment they try to speak. June 19th, 1943. Mid-Atlantic, just before dawn. U-650 hangs at periscope depth in a grey-green world where the ocean surface is a wavering ceiling and the light above it is beginning to bruise from black to slate, and von Witzendorf feels the battle draining away, not with a bang, but with the slow, humiliating certainty of lost contact. He raises the periscope again, searching for the one thing Wolfpack doctrine needs like oxygen: silhouettes, smoke smears, anything that proves the convoy is still where it should be. And he finds only emptiness, a wide, indifferent sheet of water that offers no apology for the hours he spent diving, creeping, and absorbing depth-charge concussions just to stay alive. In the control room, the navigator's pencil hovers over the chart, frozen between two possibilities. Either the convoy has continued on a line the captain can still intercept, or it has slid away again under escort direction, taking with it the only chance of a coordinated strike, and the radio man waits at his key like a man holding a match he's afraid to light. Von Witzendorf's throat is dry, and for a moment he wants to do what the doctrine demands. Transmit another report, admit contact lost, request new vectors, try to pull the scattered boats back into a net. But the last 24 hours have taught him what that report will also do, because you can almost feel the escort commander's mind out there like a pressure front. Hear a transmission, swing a bearing, charge it, force the boat down, and buy the convoy time to keep turning. The captain makes a decision that would have sounded like cowardice in 1941. He orders silence. No transmission, he says, and the words settle into the room as if the boat itself has sunk a little deeper. Men exchange glances, not because they disobey, but because they understand what has changed. A pack without speech is not a pack, and a pack that cannot form cannot kill. The boat creeps forward on electric motors, slow enough to make time feel sticky. The air grows heavier, the CO2 scrubbers working, the smell of sweat and oil becoming intimate, and every few minutes a man checks a gauge as if it's a heartbeat. You can feel the crew's resentment turning inward, at the convoy that keeps slipping away, at escorts that keep charging, at the radio key that has become a trap, at the Atlantic itself for no longer behaving like a hunting ground. Then a new sound arrives overhead, faint at first, like distant thunder that doesn't belong to the sea. Aircraft engines. It's the cruel reminder that even when the escorts break off, the sky can still find you. Long-range patrol planes roam wider now, and dawn is their favorite hour because a surfaced U-boat becomes a silhouette against a brightening horizon. Von Witzendorf hesitates, weighing battery life against survival, then orders the boat deeper, down to 90 meters, because the ocean is the only cover he can trust. The engines fade, the sound above passes, and the men release breath they didn't know they were holding. But the cost is measured immediately in numbers. Battery percentage dropping, hours of mobility shrinking, because every forced dive steals the very thing a submarine needs to attack, surface speed. In the afternoon, when the boat risks coming up again to ventilate and charge, the ocean looks deceptively calm, and that calm makes the danger worse. The bridge watch climbs out, eyes scanning, and for a brief moment, the world feels almost peaceful, until the lookout's voice cracks on a warning and a shape appears low and fast, a patrol aircraft sliding toward them with the confidence of a hunter that expects prey to dive. "Alarm!" Von Witzendorf barks, and the crew moves with drilled brutality. Hatch slammed, vents opened, boat angling down. Yet as the last man drops into the tower, he hears the rattle of machine gun fire stitching the water and the flat thud of bombs hitting nearby, a violence so casual it feels like punishment for daring to breathe. The boat shudders as concussions roll through the hull, then steadies again, deeper, alive. But the captain knows what this means for the mission. The convoy is gone, the pack is scattered, the boat is being denied time on the surface. And without time on the surface, there is no chase, no intercept, no clean torpedo run, only survival. That evening, in the red-lit control room, he finally allows one transmission, and the way he does it tells you everything about the new Atlantic. He keeps it short, coded, almost ashamed. No contact. Heavy escort activity. Aircraft. It is not the triumphant contact report that summons wolves. It is an admission that the prey has escaped and the hunters have been hunting him. When the reply comes hours later, it is equally cold. Reposition, avoid areas of strong air coverage, maintain discipline. The war has been reduced to instructions that sound like a manual for staying alive rather than winning. Von Witzendorf closes his eyes and pictures the convoy, not as a line of targets, but as a moving fortress that can shift its route, reinforced by escorts that will leave the ring to attack, and guided by invisible information that makes a wolf pack's plotted trap dissolve into empty water. He feels the crew watching him for anger, for blame, for any emotion that will make this feel like something other than helplessness, and he gives them what a captain can give when the ocean has been taken from him. Routine: check valves, rotate watches, charge batteries when safe, keep the boat ready. Yet even routine cannot hide the transformation that is now complete inside these men. They have learned that the enemy doesn't have to destroy you to defeat you. It can simply deny you contact until your patrol becomes a long, exhausting loop of evasions, forced dives, and empty horizons. Near midnight, the captain writes his patrol log entry in cramped hand, and the sentence looks harmless on paper, but carries a strategic earthquake inside it. Convoy altered course, escort response rapid, contact lost. And as he sets down the pencil, he realizes the most stunning moment wasn't the depth charges or the aircraft attack. It was that first subtle bearing shift that made the convoy feel like it had turned away from the pack. Because once you believe the prey can sidestep your trap and the guards can find your voice, you are no longer hunting in an ocean. You are operating inside an enemy system. June 23rd, 1943. Lorient, U-650 slides back into harbor under a low, hazy sky, her hull streaked with salt, her crew moving like men who have slept too little and listened too much. And as the boat enters the shadow of the concrete pens, von Witzendorf feels the strange reversal that has become the defining emotion of 1943. Returning alive no longer feels like victory. It feels like proof that the sea has changed. Mechanics catch lines and shout. Dock workers swing fenders out, and the base tries to treat it like any other arrival. Fuel, repairs, paperwork. Yet the crew's eyes drift toward the empty berths and patched boats that tell the real story of Black May's aftershock. In the debrief room, the same BDU staff officer waits with charts and pencils, but the questions are different now, sharper, less about tonnage and more about why contact evaporated. When did the convoy alter? How quickly did escorts charge? What aircraft were present? Von Witzendorf answers in a steady voice, describing the patrol as a sequence of denials. Surface runs cut short by aircraft, shadowing disrupted by aggressive escort sweeps, transmissions punished by direction-finding response, and always that final humiliation. Raising the periscope into dawn light and seeing only empty water where doctrine promised targets. The staff officer nods because this is no longer surprising. It is the pattern. He points to a marked region on the chart where other boats reported the same thing. Convoys slipping away, escorts hunting the transmitter, contact collapsing, and he doesn't call it convoys turning away, but he might as well, because the effect is the same. Wolf packs can't close if the prey keeps shifting and the guards keep forcing the pack down. Outside, in the base's corridors, rumors harden into accepted truth. The Allies have extended air cover, strengthened escort groups, deployed radar that works in fog, and perfected HF/DF to such a degree that a short contact report can bring destroyers charging down the bearing before the pack even forms. Men talk about it like weather, inevitable, omnipresent, because in their world, technology and tactics have become the climate. In the officers' mess, von Witzendorf sits with other commanders, and the conversation doesn't sound like hunters planning a kill. It sounds like men comparing ways to survive, how long you can remain submerged before your batteries become a verdict, how to time surface charging so aircraft don't catch your silhouette at dawn, how to shorten transmissions without losing the pack, how to avoid being run down the moment you speak. Someone mentions ONS-5 again, the fog battles, the escort's radar-guided charges, the U-boats sunk and damaged, and the table goes quiet for a moment, because everyone knows that convoy battle was not an anomaly, but a warning flare that the entire Atlantic had shifted. And now, weeks later, they are living inside the consequence. In Kerneval's bunker, Donitz's staff keep moving pins and rewriting instructions. But the strategic reality has already asserted itself. The North Atlantic is no longer a place where massed night surface attacks can be conducted reliably without catastrophic losses. The U-boat arm can still bite, still sink ships, but it cannot do so at the scale needed to win the tonnage war under these conditions. And every patrol that ends with no contact is not just a missed opportunity. It is evidence of a managed enemy system that denies the U-boats the one thing they need most: sustained proximity to the convoy. On the quay, sailors unload gear, scrub the boat, and try to laugh the way men do when they refuse to admit fear, but their laughter feels thin. They've learned that the enemy doesn't have to see you to control you, that a convoy can be nudged away by information and escort pressure, that a radio call can betray you even if the code is unbroken, and that darkness is no longer darkness when radar can paint you in fog. That night, alone in his small quarters, von Witzendorf writes his final debrief notes, and his handwriting tightens when he reaches the line that matters most. Not the depth charge patterns, not the aircraft attack, but the moment the convoy altered and the pack failed to close, because in that moment, he felt the old Atlantic die. The title that would someday be written over these experiences, German U-boat crews were stunned when convoys turned away from their wolf packs, is not just about a clever zigzag. It is about the psychological shock of realizing the prey has gained initiative, that the convoy is no longer a passive victim, but a moving fortress, guided by intelligence and protected by aggressive hunters, and that the wolf pack's need to communicate has become a weakness the enemy exploits. The war will continue, the boats will sail again, and Germany will keep trying new detectors and new tactics, but the men of U-650 now carry a permanent sensation in their bones. The Atlantic has started listening, and once the ocean listens, it stops being a wilderness and becomes a controlled space, one where the convoy can slip sideways out of the knife and leave the wolf pack staring into empty water, stunned not by a single defeat, but by the realization that the entire battlefield has been taken away.